Night presses low over the lake, and the water holds its breath like a drumskin before the first strike. At dawn, boots scrape on stone causeways and bare feet whisper over reed mats as a city on water wakes to a new weight in the air. How does a city that feeds hundreds of thousands fall in barely 2 years? And why did strangers become the lever of so many old grudges? It begins with wind and salt and rumor, with iron glinting where mangroves meet surf in 1519, and with watchful eyes calculating whether these arrivals are a passing storm or a door that won't close again. Who were the newcomers, and what world had shaped their hunger before they saw the valley? They came from a crown stretching across seas, hardened by island conquests and sugar fields, carrying steel breastplates, crossbows, matchlocks that coughed smoke, lean war dogs and horses whose hooves struck like thunder on packed earth. What did they find on the high plateau and along the lakes? They found a political web knit by tribute and prestige, a triple alliance that declared winners and debtors, roads and causeways sewn across water, and a market at Tlatelolco where cacao, salt, cotton, and maize moved like blood through the veins of empire. Why would Tlaxcala, surrounded and pressed for decades, choose to fight at the side of men it had just battled? Because the math changed when steel and horse met obsidian and reed, because a siege measured in generations offered no future, and because in the noise of new weapons, Tlaxcala heard the possibility of rewriting old ledgers. How did blood turn to pact after the first days of savage fighting in the ravines? Spears broke, banners fell, and both sides learned the other would not yield to a single charge, so talk followed exhaustion, gifts followed talk, and a careful alliance braided guides, porters, food, carpenters, and scouts into a campaign that suddenly seemed thinkable. What did Cholula prove about fear and reputation? That rumor kills as quickly as iron, that a suspected ambush can set temples alight, and that from that smoke onward, many towns measured their loyalty against the new arithmetic of survival and revenge. How did the strangers cross the water and step into a city hovering between channels and sky in November 1519? They followed etiquette written in feathers and cacao, exchanged gifts under perfumed canopies, and were swallowed by courtyards of carved stone, while the market pulsed on and the lake shivered under canoes that never slept. What happens when the Tlatoani sits under watch and ceremony repeats itself with a tremor in the voice? Authority fractures into cautious factions, commands echo with a second foreign pulse, and the calendar that steadied the year begins to wobble as if a stone has been nudged beneath the great drum. Why did the balance crack when a rival expedition rose from the coast in 1520? Because the commander split his strength to face his own countrymen, and in the gap left behind, ritual collided with panic, music turned to screams in a sacred patio, and the mask of diplomacy fell into shards that cut everyone who tried to pick it up. What is remembered of the night? The city bit back, and the lake became a blade. Rain, moonlight, bridges ripped out, panicked men sinking under the greed they carried, canoes slamming against rough timber, and the knowledge at dawn that pride bleeds like any other thing when water closes over it. Why did that defeat not end the story, but redraw it? Because defeat teaches better than victory when the lesson is water. Because the survivors learned the lake must be mastered or nothing else matters. And because allies who had carried the weight in ravines would now carry planks, nails, tar, and plans. How did an invisible enemy stride through patios and workshops the same year? And why did it count more than a dozen battles? Smallpox moved where crowds breathed and hands shared bowls, breaking chains of command, turning ritual into mourning, and hollowing out the workforce that repaired canoes, guarded bridges, and counted grain for the next day. Why was a fleet the key to a valley without a sea? Because a lake is a lung, and whoever controls the lung controls the breath. Because brigantines can cut supply lines like knives through reed. and because cutting the causeways turns the old pride of the city into a trap for its own defenders. What did Tlaxcala bring that iron alone could not? Numbers, endurance, local mastery of water and wind, roads and food and replacements, prestige among other towns, and the stubborn morale of people who had waited generations to reverse a tribute flow that had drained them like a slow fever. How did the Triple Alliance's strength also make it fragile? Scale collects wealth and soldiers fast, but it also depends on tributary nodes that watch for weakness. And when nodes smell weakness, they become holes, and every hole is a leak the center can't plug all at once. What did daily life sound like inside the siege? Thin porridge hissing in pots, children asking where the fish have gone, drums thudding to hold the soul upright, whispered arguments over whether to pull apart doors for wood, and whether to risk the canal at night for a single basket of maize. Who stood last under the weight of responsibility when the variables had already decided the outcome months before? A young ruler carrying an inheritance made of fire and scarcity, shifting from barrio to barrio to keep the city from collapsing in one blow, reaching for allies who no longer came, trying to trade time for breath in a room that had none left. What did the last push in 1521 compress into a single day? Canoes cut off from retreat, courtyards turned into killing floors, smoke laying a new low ceiling over streets that were no longer streets, and a final exhausted silence that felt less like triumph or grief than like arithmetic concluding its sum. Why does it matter now to say the fall was the work of many hands, not one sword? Because myth simplifies and simplification steals agency from the towns whose decisions fed the outcome. Because disease and logistics win wars as surely as bravery does, and because coalitions, not lone heroes, decide the shape of regions and the breadth of cities. How did words fight alongside weapons and change the map without drawing a blade? Interpreters and go-betweens traded more than nouns. They traded horizons, turned rumor into treaty or treaty into blood, and at every fire pit where prices for wood, maize, and silence were set, the war found either a bridge or a wall. What became of the Allies when banners changed hands and seals stamped new papers, exemptions, promises, disappointments, new hierarchies built out of old desires, some towns rising on Mercedes and favors, while others learned that victory's arithmetic rarely balances evenly across a generation? How does a market like Tlatelolco tell you when the end is near before generals do? Stalls thin, baskets sit half full, dogs grow mean with hunger, people count steps between water jugs and home and find they can't afford the distance, and the plaza that once sang abundance begins to hum an inventory of absences. What did the newcomers learn from the lake that made them more dangerous month by month? Where the wind turns, how to use chinampas as shields, how to anchor hulls with chains from the causeways, how to ration wood, water, and maize so that vanity never outruns supply again, and how to move with local rhythm instead of stumbling against it. Where does time sit in a siege, and why do 2 years feel like an age for a capital? Time eats veterans, leaves green captains in their place, empties granaries, frays patience, and sculpts habits in attackers so they waste less and press more, and once habit sets in the clock favors the hand that wound it. How are maps rewritten after a fall, and why does stone whisper even when names change? Routes of pilgrimage become roads of commerce, temple platforms become foundations for new rooms with new bells, porters carry different burdens along the same lines, and the drained lake stores its memory in dust that still smells faintly of reed. Why does this story still burn in arguments about violence, memory, and justice? Because counting the dead tempts simplification, because narratives prefer heroes to invoices, and because telling it with rigor means hearing markets and courtyards and canals explain their reasons without being forced into a single anthem. What remains after 13th August 1521 besides new rulers and new dates, a living city made of two cities, an old name wrapped around new laws, generations that grow up speaking with different vowels over the same water's edge, and a lesson that keeps returning whenever a capital trusts abundance more than its arteries. Why it matters now is simple and hard. Supply routes are the organs of any metropolis. Epidemics are not side notes to conflict, but its breadth, and alliances between yesterday's enemies can be more decisive than any innovation of metal or flame. What, then, do we learn for our own built lagoons, visible or invisible? That logistics writes the ceiling of ambition, that pride is not a ration, and that any power which cannot feed its plazas or protect its nodes is already inside the first paragraph of a future chronicle. If a city on a lake could teach us anything as the water turned from cradle to knife, it would be that greatness is a balance that needs steady hands on many ropes. And if we are listening, the last question the lake asks is whether our cities would recognize the sound of their own siege in time, or only when the water has already climbed their knees.